Have you ever loved someone so intensely that, when they left, you felt as if a part of you had been ripped away? Those shared moments, the memories etched in your soul, perhaps even pieces of your very identity. And then, suddenly, that person's absence becomes a presence heavier than their presence itself. A confusing, suffocating pain, impossible to bear. And you find yourself wondering, how do I let go of someone who still lives within my thoughts? How do I stop feeling so attached without becoming bitter or callous? Let me ask you a question before I continue. Have you ever tried to hold someone so tightly that the tighter you squeezed, the more they slipped through your fingers? Tell me in the comments. This is where the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics shines like a light in the darkness. They didn't teach us to suppress our emotions, but to master them. Not to stop caring, but to stop clinging. Today, we'll explore 5 powerful rules of Stoicism to help you emotionally detach while maintaining your inner strength. If there's a part of you ready to regain peace, stay with me. What you'll discover here may be exactly what you've needed for a long time. Rule number 1. Understand the impermanence of life. You know that friendship you were sure would last forever. That relationship that seemed rock. One day, these people are completely woven into your routine, part of your identity, and the next, silence. There was no fight, no explanation, just silence. And in this silence, we suffer, not only because they're gone, but because we never prepared for the possibility that they might leave. Marcus Aurelius wrote something profound. All we hear is an opinion, not a fact. All we see is a perspective, not the truth. When we become emotionally attached, we're not just creating bonds with people. We're building stories around them. We imagine permanence where none exists. We create meanings that may not be shared, and we convince ourselves that this connection is fixed, solid, guaranteed. But it never is. The Stoics knew that everything in life is fleeting, that nothing truly belongs to us. Not people, not moments, not even our own youth. That's why the first rule of emotional detachment is to understand impermanence and look. The Stoics didn't see this as pessimism. They saw it as preparation. If you accept that everything eventually changes, you stop clinging. You begin to appreciate each moment as it comes, instead of trying to hold on to it for fear of loss. I remember a friendship that lasted over 10 years. We were close in a way that seemed unbreakable. We knew each other's secrets, dreams, fears. We had conversations that lasted into the wee hours. But little by little, as life changed, so did the friendship. The messages became more rare. The calls stopped. I found myself holding on tighter, trying to revive what was no longer there. I sent messages, made dates, pretended nothing had changed. But it had. And every time I tried to reconnect, it felt like I was dragging something heavy, something lifeless. Still, I couldn't let go. Why? Because in my head, that friendship was supposed to last forever. I was mourning a story I had written, not the truth of what was happening. Only when I truly accepted that that friendship had completed its cycle did I feel free. There was no dramatic end, no betrayal, just the natural fading that life sometimes brings. And in that realization, I remembered Marcus Aurelius' wisdom: accept everything that happens, even if it seems unpleasant, because it leads to the health of the universe. Letting go wasn't giving up. It was returning to the present moment where peace truly lives. Think of impermanence like the tide. You can't stop the waves, no matter how hard you try. And when you resist their force, you only exhaust yourself. But if you learn to float, to move with the current instead of against it, you begin to experience a strange kind of calm, because you're no longer trying to possess what was never meant to be kept. The Stoics trained themselves to embrace this truth daily. They practiced a mental exercise called Premeditatio malorum, imagining loss before it happened. Not to suffer twice, but to suffer less. They reminded themselves, this person I love can leave. This thing I value can break. This phase of life won't last. And by doing so, they became stronger, calmer, more present. It's easy to believe that if something mattered to you, it should last forever. But life doesn't work that way. Friendships fade. Love fades. People grow apart. This isn't a tragedy. It's a rhythm. And when you understand it most, stop fighting the rhythm. So ask yourself, what emotional weight are you still carrying, simply because you haven't accepted the impermanence of what you lost? Are you mourning the loss itself or the illusion that it would never change? Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering clearly, without the distortion of attachment. It means honoring what was real without needing it to last forever. Embrace the truth. People come and go, but your peace, your ability to remain centered as life changes, is something you can build and protect. Because in the end, those who accept the flow of life suffer less than those who try to dam the river. Now that you understand the basis of detachment, let's go deeper. Because knowing that life changes is only part of the battle. The next step is learning to control your inner world when emotions try to overpower your reason. Rule number 2, master your emotions through rational thought. Have you ever texted someone you care about? Maybe something vulnerable, something honest, ... And then you waited for an answer that never came. The hours pass, your chest tightens, your thoughts spiral. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Is it over? Before you know it, your mind has turned a single moment of silence into an emotional storm. But stop for a second and ask, what really happened? They didn't answer. That's all. Everything else, every anxious thought, every heavy emotion, was something your mind created. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not over external events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The Stoics believed that emotions are not facts. They are the result of how we think. Pain, sadness, anger, they seem automatic, but they don't come from what happens to us. They come from the meaning we assign to what happens. This is the difficult truth, and also the liberating one. The second rule of emotional detachment is to master your emotions by mastering your thoughts. This doesn't mean you repress what you feel. It means you question the story behind the feeling. Epictetus said it best, "It is not things that disturb us, but our judgments about things." In other words, life doesn't hurt you. Your interpretation of life does. Let's say you're going through a breakup. The relationship ends, and suddenly you feel like you're falling apart. You replay every conversation. You obsess over what you should have said, what you could have done differently. You ask, how did they move on so quickly? Why didn't it matter to them anymore? But what if you interrupted this cycle and asked, what are the real facts here? The relationship is over. That's the fact. Everything else, the meaning you give it, the value you attribute to yourself because of it, is a product of thought. And thoughts can be changed. I once went through something like this with a close friend. We had a deep conversation one night, something personal, and I felt like we really connected. The next day, I sent a message following up on the topic. No response. Hours passed. Then a whole day. By the end of the night, I was convinced something was wrong. I must have said too much. Maybe I'd crossed a line. Maybe the friendship was ruined. My thoughts were racing, and my emotions followed suit. But the next morning, they responded as if nothing had happened. I discovered they'd had a family emergency and hadn't checked their phones. They weren't upset. They weren't distancing themselves. They were simply unavailable. That moment taught me something powerful. My suffering wasn't caused by their silence. It was caused by my interpretation of their silence. Marcus Aurelius said, "The soul is tinged with the color of its thoughts." I had let my mind color the situation with fear, insecurity, and false meaning. When I could have waited in peace, I chose to suffer in speculation. This is the choice we all face every day. Will you believe every thought your mind throws at you, or will you slow down and ask, is this real or just a reaction? When we stop accepting every emotional reaction as truth, we begin to regain control. We realize that mastering our emotions isn't about becoming robotic. It's about becoming sovereign. It's about choosing thoughts that serve our peace, rather than those that poison it. So the next time you feel the storm brewing, when you're angry, hurt, or anxious, ask yourself, what am I really reacting to? What are the facts? And what story am I creating around them? This kind of internal questioning isn't easy. It requires discipline. It requires awareness. But it's the only way to stop being ruled by emotions that were never rooted in reality. And when you begin to think clearly, you begin to feel clearly. That's where true detachment begins. Now that, if you've begun to regain the power of your mind, it's time to build the emotional resilience that keeps you going even when loss is inevitable. In the next rule, you'll learn how to prepare your heart for change before it arrives, so that when life changes, you remain standing. Rule number 3, practice negative. Visualization for resilience. Have you ever found yourself fearing the worst and then immediately tried to block that thought? Like imagining someone you love suddenly leaving, or your entire life changing without warning. And you shake yourself, saying to yourself, don't think like that. Be positive. We've been taught to avoid these thoughts. But what if the Stoics believed the opposite? What if facing these fears deliberately, calmly, and with discipline was actually the path to strength? Marcus Aurelius, writing in the quiet hours of war and political turmoil, once said, don't disturb yourself by imagining all the troubles of your life at once. Instead, as each one arises, face it with calm and self-control. The Stoics weren't telling us to dwell in darkness. They were teaching us to train for it. They called it Premeditatio, malorum, the premeditation of adversity, or in modern terms, negative visualization. At first glance, it sounds contradictory. Why would anyone intentionally imagine losing what they love? But the truth is, everything you value is temporary. Your relationships, your routines, even your own body. You can ignore it, or you can prepare for it. And preparation doesn't harden your heart. It strengthens your spirit. A few years ago, one of my closest friends told me he was thinking about moving to the other side of the world. We were inseparable. Daily calls, inside jokes, deep conversations about life and purpose. And suddenly, there was a real chance that I would wake up one day and they wouldn't be here anymore. My first instinct was to deny it, to say, no way. That's not going to happen. I'll figure it out. But this resistance only worsened the fear. Then I remembered the Stoics. I began practicing what they taught. Every morning, I spent a few minutes imagining what life would be like if they were gone. Not as punishment, but as preparation. I imagined sitting alone in the cafe where we used to meet. I visualized coming home after a difficult day and not having their voice on the other end. And then I kept going. I imagined new routines, different conversations, new ways of growing without them. When the day finally arrived and they moved, it still hurt, but the pain didn't crush me. I had already gone through that goodbye in my mind 100 times, and because of that, I didn't fall apart. I adapted. That's the power of negative visualization. You don't do it to grieve in advance. You do it to dull the shock, to remind yourself that you can survive what you fear. That loss isn't the end. It's a transition. Seneca echoed this when he wrote, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than it is necessary." The suffering you carry because of someone else's neglect is not noble. It's misdirected. You don't need to explain yourself to someone who has already decided not to understand you. You don't need to lose your identity trying to hold together something that's falling apart because someone refuses to meet you halfway. Detachment in this case isn't a lack of love. It's the highest form of self. It's looking at someone and saying, "I care about you, but I won't destroy myself to prove it." It's stepping out of the savior role and realizing that your energy is too sacred to be wasted saving someone who has no interest in saving themselves the moment you stop setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Something incredible happens. You feel lighter. You begin to see the difference between connection and codependency. You begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that were always begging for air under all the emotional weight. And perhaps the hardest part, no one will give you permission to stop. You have to choose. You have to decide that your peace matters more than their approval, that your dignity matters more than their confusion, that your silence may be the only language they will ever understand. The Stoics teach us to act virtuously, not to be martyrs, to show up with compassion, but never at the cost of clarity, to give without expectation, but never to give ourselves completely. So if you're stuck in that place, always explaining, always fixing, always giving more than you receive, take a step back, not because you're cold, but because it's finally clear. And once you learn to protect that peace, the next step is even more powerful. Building a life so full, so rooted in your own values, that you no longer chase what's gone. Rule number 4. Focus on what you can control. Have you ever felt like you were doing everything right? Being attentive, present, giving your best to someone, and still, it wasn't enough. They drifted apart. They drifted apart. And no matter how much effort you put in, it felt like you were chasing a shadow that kept slipping through your fingers. That feeling of helplessness, of giving everything and still losing, can eat you alive. It leaves you wondering, what else could I have done? How do I fix this? But here's a truth the Stoics knew well. Our suffering often begins the moment we try to control what isn't ours to command. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not over external events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That single sentence carries a lifetime of freedom. Because, if we're honest, much of our emotional pain, especially in relationships, comes from our desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable. Their feelings, their decisions, their behavior. We mold ourselves, we adjust, we perform, all in the hope that they will stay or love us the way we love them. But it never works. Because no matter how perfect you try to be, you can't rule another person's heart. I remember being in a relationship where I constantly felt like I had to earn my place. I planned thoughtful dates, sent sweet messages, tried to anticipate their needs. But the more I gave, the less I felt seen. They withdrew, and I tried harder. It became a cycle. I poured more. They withdrew even further. It wasn't until I was completely exhausted that I realized the problem wasn't that I wasn't enough. The problem was that I was trying to control how they felt about me, and that was never in my hands to begin with. That's what this rule is all about, focusing only on what you can control. Your thoughts, your actions, your choices. Nothing else. You can't make someone care. You can't force someone to value you, but you can choose how you show up. You can choose whether to stay in a dynamic that drains you or walk away with self-respect. The moment I stopped trying to manage their emotions and started managing my own expectations, something shifted. I found peace, not because they changed, but because I changed. I let go of the illusion that I could make the relationship work through sheer effort, and in that letting go, I regained my energy. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste so much of it. And one of the greatest wastes is trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed, or waiting for validation that may never come. When your happiness depends on someone else's attention, you've given them power over your peace. That's not love. It's captivity. Imagine you're in a friendship where you constantly feel neglected. You're the one who keeps in touch, the one who asks how they are, the one who keeps the connection alive, but they never meet you halfway. Naturally, it hurts. You start to wonder if you said something wrong. You replay conversations, looking for the moment when everything changed. But the Stoic response isn't to spiral. It's to pause. It's asking, what is truly mine here? You can't force them to show up. You can't make them prioritize you. But you can decide whether you want to continue investing in someone who doesn't invest in you. That choice is yours. And within that choice lies your freedom. Emotional detachment in this context isn't about pushing people away. It's about releasing the need for them to be different than they are. It's about stopping the persecution. You stop making your peace conditional on their presence, their affection, their approval. You create emotional autonomy, a self that remains steadfast no matter who comes or goes. There was a point in my life when I realized I was placing too much weight on how others treated me. If someone was warm, I felt worthy. If someone was cold, I felt rejected. I was living on a roller coaster of reactions I couldn't control. But when I started applying Stoic principles, something powerful happened. I began to anchor my worth in who I chose to be, not in how others responded. And that changed everything. Marcus Aurelius said, "The impediment to action drives action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The pain you feel now, the rejection, the confusion, the longing. This is your path. Not to fix the other person, but to fix your focus. So if you're wondering, what can I do to get them back? How do I make this work? You're asking the wrong questions. Ask instead, what is mine to control? What is mine to let go of? Because once you let go of what you can't control, you begin to rise. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. And now that you've learned to reclaim your power, let's take another step. In the next rule, you'll see how stepping back and looking at the bigger picture can dissolve the illusion that this single person or moment defines your worth. Rule number 5. Reflect. About the bigger picture, Have you ever been so overwhelmed by the end of a relationship that it felt like your whole world collapsed? Like nothing mattered anymore? Like your future had been erased? When you're in that emotional fog, it's hard to see anything beyond the present pain. Every hour feels heavier. Every memory stings. And the question swirling in your mind is always the same. How will I move on from this? This is exactly where the Stoic perspective becomes not only useful, but life-saving. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have to piece together your life yourself, action by action, and be satisfied if each achieves its goal as far as possible." In other words, zoom out. This moment when you're drowning isn't your whole story. It's a scene, not the script. When we're emotionally attached to someone, our vision narrows. They become the center of everything. Our happiness, our worth, our future, everything becomes tied to their presence. So when they leave or disappoint us, we feel like we've lost ourselves too. But the truth is, you were always more than that person. You were always more than that chapter. I once went through a breakup that felt like the end of my world. Not because they did something terrible, but because I had wrapped so much of my identity around them. I had stopped seeing the bigger picture of my life. For weeks, I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Everything seemed darker, but eventually, something shifted. I took a long walk alone one night, under a sky full of stars. And for the first time, I asked myself, will this matter 5 years from now? Does this person really define the meaning of my life? That single question shattered the illusion. I began to remember the other parts of me that existed long before that relationship. The passions, the people, the purpose. Slowly, I began to rebuild. And what helped most wasn't distraction. It was perspective. I realized that the breakup wasn't the end. It was just a turning point in a much longer and richer journey. That's what the Stoics teach us. To see life from a higher altitude. To remember that every storm eventually passes. And when it does, you'll still be here. Stronger, wiser, and more grounded than before. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself that our fears are attachments, and even our grief are fleeting in the great flow of time. Time is like a river, he wrote, composed of events that happen and a violent current. As soon as something is seen, it is swept away, and another comes in its place. So if you're suffering now, I'm not telling you to pretend it doesn't hurt. I'm asking you to look more broadly. Take a step back. Look at the 5-year timeline of your life, the 10-year view. How many moments like that have you survived? And each time, you rose. Each time, you became someone you weren't before. This isn't coincidence. It's growth when you reflect on the bigger picture. You begin to loosen the grip that temporary people or moments have on your permanent peace. You stop giving one season the power to define your entire journey, and when you do, you stop reacting from panic and start responding from purpose. So, if this message speaks to something real within you, I invite you to take a small action. Comment the word perspective below. That's all. A simple reminder to zoom out, breathe, and remember that this moment isn't the whole of your life. And if you've made it this far, consider subscribing. This space exists for people like you. People who want to think more deeply, live more calmly, and rise stronger. Because emotional detachment isn't about shutting yourself down. It's about waking up to how big your life truly is. Let this be the beginning of that awakening. You've just walked through the fire of detachment. You've learned what it means to let go clearly, to see people as they are, not as you expected them to be. You've faced the pain of emotional detachment and the truth that not everything broken is meant to be fixed. But here's what most people don't realize: detachment isn't the finish line, it's the gateway. Because once you stop chasing what no longer serves your peace, the question becomes, where are you running to? You're no longer holding on to the past. But what are you holding on to now? Silence, emptiness, or space? A space ready to be filled with something stronger, something more real. This is the sacred turning point. The moment where clarity must become action, where letting go must evolve into building, where your energy, once scattered, trying to save someone else, finally returns to you. Now the work begins, not of forgetting, but of forging, not of avoiding pain, but of rising through it. Now you begin the deepest Stoic path. Part 2. You don't owe anyone your breakdown. You've seen yourself giving everything. Just how to hold on to a relationship until you realize you were the only one holding on. You tried to talk. You tried to be more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. You gave more than you had to give, and still nothing changed. They kept pulling away, and you kept reaching out, thinking that maybe if you tried a little harder, they would come back. This is the trap so many fall into. The belief that love means sacrifice at any cost. That if someone is slipping, it's your job to hold on tighter. That if they are unhappy, it's your job to fix it. But the Stoics would say otherwise. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be tolerant of others and strict with yourself." This doesn't mean tolerating being used. It means maintaining your integrity even when others lose theirs. It means being responsible for your peace, not for someone else's chaos. You weren't put here to be someone else's emotional firefighter. You weren't born to bleed silently so someone else can prevent your healing. The Stoic path isn't coldness, it's clarity. And clarity means recognizing when you've crossed from compassion to self-destruction. I remember the story of a woman who spent years in a relationship with a man who refused to grow. He would disappear emotionally for days, only to reappear with apologies. And each time she opened her arms, she thought that if she showed enough love, he would finally choose to stay. One night, after another long silence, he said, "I never asked you to care so much." And it broke her. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He never asked, but she kept offering. She had mistaken her willingness to help for responsibility. She thought that bearing his burdens proved her worth. In reality, it only buried her under someone else's problems. Seneca once said, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than it is necessary." The suffering you carry because of someone else's neglect is not noble. It is misdirected. You don't need to explain yourself to someone who has already decided not to understand you. You don't have to lose your identity trying to hold together something that's falling apart because someone refuses to meet you halfway. Detachment in this case isn't a lack of love. It's the highest form of self. It's looking at someone and saying, "I care about you, but I won't destroy myself to prove it." It's stepping out of the savior role and realizing that your energy is too sacred to be wasted saving someone who has no interest in saving themselves. The moment you stop setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, something incredible happens. You feel lighter. You begin to see the difference between connection and codependency. You begin to reclaim the parts of yourself that were always begging for air under all the emotional weight. And perhaps the hardest part, no one will give you permission to stop. You have to choose. You have to decide that your peace matters more than their approval, that your dignity matters more than their confusion, that your silence may be the only language they will ever understand. The Stoics teach us to act virtuously, not to be martyrs, to show up with compassion, but never at the cost of clarity, to give without expectation, but never to give ourselves completely. So if you're stuck in that place, always explaining, always fixing, always giving more than you receive, take a step back. Not because you're cold, but because it's finally clear. And once you learn to protect that peace, the next step is even more powerful. Build a life so full that you don't chase what's gone. There's a certain silence that follows the end of a connection. The messages stop. The calls don't come. The routines that once gave structure to your day disappear overnight. And in that silence, it's easy to mistake absence for emptiness. You start to think, I feel this way because they left. But what if the truth is deeper? What if what you're really feeling isn't just the loss of a person, but the space where your own life should be? The Stoics were never obsessed with people. They were obsessed with principles, with building a life that stands on its own, Seneca said. A great mind becomes a great fortune. In other words, if you want to stop being shaken by what leaves, start building what no one can take from you. After a breakup, most people try to fill the void with distraction. New people, new pleasures, noise. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. Don't run away from the space they left. Enter it. Let it be the place where you finally grow. I knew a man who lost the woman he thought he would marry. She broke up with him suddenly. No explanation, just silence. For weeks he was paralyzed, mourning not only her, but the identity he had built around being with her. But then something changed. He stopped checking her social media. He stopped forwarding conversations.